Here to help break down Chris Campson's testimony is criminal defense attorney, the great George Stein. Welcome, George.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, in watching Campson testify, he seems like a good witness for the prosecution, but he also is a good witness for the defense. He testifies that Goodman refused the car bombs, that this is a guy who always slurs when he speaks, and these are all critical things that the defense wants to establish too. So our viewers are probably wondering, why call Campson as the prosecution's witness in the case in chief?
Well, the prosecution sometimes will call, what would otherwise be determined to be a better defense witness to get to them first, to try to control them, to try to get some measure and dimension on what they're going to say. And so that's the strategy there. But the bottom line is when you hear this guy testify, he kind of has a delayed reaction when he's sober. I mean, a drinking witness is not really that much of a quality witness. And also consider, too, I mean, when people go out and socialize, normally they don't count how many drinks other people have. And
well, we know, a regular witness is not necessarily a good witness. And so imagine including drinking in it. Drinking witnesses make terrible witnesses when it comes to perception. I want to ask you something else. When it comes to this, the astrology of jury selection, everybody has a theory. Sometimes they're grounded in lots of prejudice and other things. But I always like to find out, in a case like this, because DUIs are different than any other crime. Anyone can commit a DUI. Grandpa, your cousin, anybody. Who do you look for to impanel as a jury in jury selection for a DUI case?
Well, somebody who's well-rounded, who can empathize. I can tell you clearly, Danny, who I don't want. I don't want too many non-drinkers on there.
Right.
And I don't want somebody who's morally opposed to any consumption of alcohol.
Right.
Because they're not flexible and they won't listen.
How about the theory, I've heard the theory that you want older people, older men, because they're from a time when if the cops pulled you over and you had a few, they would make you park it and walk it home. They don't view DUIs the same as people do today. What about that theory?
Well, that is true. There's always life experiences with every particular human being that might jade them one way or the other. But in a general sense, you're absolutely right, because as you know, the limit used to be .15, then it went down to .10, now it's .08. In the good old days, you could knock down 3 or 4 heavy cocktails and drive home, and that's what they often think about.
I want to ask you about that, too. I mean, the direction we're going, in a relatively short period of time, the BAC limit has dropped and dropped and dropped. Does the DUI defense bar, do we see a future where, in the not-too-distant future, it's going to be 0? We're not going to be able to drink at all and drive, which no one should do. I want to put that out there. Nobody should be drinking. Nobody should be driving. But it's important to know while it's morally questionable, it's legally allowed. You are allowed to drink and drive. So what direction is our society going?
Well, you're right. You're allowed to drink a reasonable amount and drive a car. That's just the way it is in most jurisdictions. If you're a minor, that changes a little bit. But if you're 21 or over, you're allowed to do that. And the direction it probably will go in the future may be the direction that it goes in, that it's currently in Europe, more like a .05, where they're just becoming less and less tolerant. And it's putting a dampening effect on restaurants and businesses.
Yeah, and give us some perspective. I mean, in your experience, .05, I mean, for a 150-pound male, how many drinks is that? That's probably a couple beers, right?
Yeah, as I like to say, that's looking at a beer if you're small or petite. But, just 1 or 2 and you're there. And the other thing, too, is in the cases where there's a refusal and there is no BAC that's known, then the officer still tries to get you convicted. The prosecutor still comes after you just based solely on opinion.
I want to talk about that. Most people don't know. Again, drinking and driving is a horrible idea, but most people don't realize that in America, in many states, most states, you can be convicted if your blood alcohol content is a certain level, .08 right now.
Yes.
And that's nationally. But what most people don't know is that if they don't have that breathalyzer result, if they don't have a blood test result, if for some reason it gets tossed by emotion, they can convict you based on the officer's personal, subjective opinion, based on his observations, not recorded, on the side of a highway in the middle of the night. And tell us a little about that.
Well, they are subjective, and they're quite jaded in most instances. And of course, they base them on field sobriety tests, which I always contend are designed for failure. Let's face it, when they ask you to walk a straight line, they ask you to keep your arms by your side, and they tell you to look down at your feet.
Look, at 2 in the morning, a lot of females are wearing stiletto heels. I mean,
right.
and unless you're wearing basketball shoes, something with some support, even men's shoes are not that great. I would not want to be doing the walk and turn or the one-legged stand in the shoes I have right now.
That's true. But if you ask somebody to look at their feet, Danny, just think of what you're doing. You're actually taking away their point of reference, or what we call horizon. There's no reference point after that. Or if you look at the scenario of a greatly trained gymnast, those young people that spin in the air and go in the balance beam, what's the first thing they do? They raise their arms. What's the next thing they always do? They look out straight ahead. That's called a point of reference or horizon. The police, they take that away from you. They tell you to look at your feet when you're doing these feats, and they tell you to put your arms by your side, and then lo and behold, they come up with an opinion that you must be impaired.
Yeah, I think it's important for our viewers to know that that's the way the law is structured, so that if, and it's also used in a refusal case, if you refuse and for some reason they don't have that blood alcohol content, they can still proceed on their observations. And those observations are very subjective. After all, they're made by someone with the job of ferreting out crime. Right?
Opinion crime. That's what it's all about. It's like no other crime in America. Can you imagine if somebody said, listen, it's legal to steal up to 20 bucks, but if you steal over 20 bucks, well, then it's a crime.
It's like no other crime in America. DUI, I've always contended, very different. All right. Thank you very much, George. We're going to have you back very, very soon in 20, 30 minutes. The prosecution is about to call its next witness to the stand. She is a bartender at the Players Club and served the defendant drinks the night he crashed his car and killed Scott Wilson.